systems go. Clear for liftoff.
Yo, what's going on, golf fans? It's your boy, GS Luke, here with our Round 4 live stream for the Open Championship. Gonna break down the showdown side, get you ready to build your lineups with a look at the weather report, some strategy for Sunday, which has placement points, so a little bit of a different angle that we've got to talk about there. We'll also go through the shots gained metrics, ownership towards the top end of the board, as well as any player pool deep dives that you've got for me in the chat. But it looks like we've got a few of the sweaty tryhards there early. We got Goku Lex, Lori Cantor fan as well. Any of those questions will be going through a little bit later, but feel free to go ahead and throw those in the chat now. We got Steven, Seafloy, also Bo and Nick. And as Nick says, we got Long Dong Hao Tong at the top, who's great to see. I mean, Chinese SpongeBob, as we called him as well. Just a kind of guy that you're only going to see it in a major championship in contention, maybe once or twice in their career. So hats off, tip of the cap to Hao Tong, and we got ourselves a Sunday slate ahead. But speaking of, let's take a look at these averages from today, which slightly favored the later starters. But if you watched the golf, it wasn't really conditions that did that. It was quality of play towards the top. You had guys like Matty Schmid that shot +8. Unfortunately, I had Schmid in some lineups. Didn't tank all of them, though. We'll talk about it later, I suppose. One of the best days in Showdown I've had for quite some time. Had 7 of the top 100 in the big drive of the green. None that finished in the top 20, though. So we were good, not great. Matty Schmid, though, some of these AM wave players, as I was getting to, really threw off the scoring average. So you did have a few guys like Dirty Dean Burmester that also shot well over par towards the later half of tee times. But the vast majority of the players that were into the +1, +2 range were players on that side of things. So I think that's really the main reason that it played a stroke easier than, on top of the fact that the guys towards the top, where your top players in the world, official World Golf Rankings top 20 is just filled with guys towards the top, and also the players that are playing the best golf this week. And with the weather forecast looking very similar for tomorrow, I'm expecting a similar type of trend. So when we go back and look at the round 4 stats after, tomorrow night, wouldn't surprise me if it was once again a one-stroke advantage towards the PM. Even though the weather doesn't look that drastic, it looks almost the exact same across the board. About 9 miles an hour of sustained wind on this ECM model, about 14, 15 miles an hour of gusts the entire day. And if we take a look through some of the other ones, it's also rather consistent. And this one has a little bit of afternoon rain, but from the wind perspective, it is as flat as you could possibly ask for. Medio Blue model, the same kind of thing. Maybe slightly higher winds in the afternoon, but even then, you still have to have the placement points. You still have to have some guys in the top 20. So even if this ended up coming true, you wouldn't want to favor the morning guys anyways. You have the Icon model, which is also pretty flat, about a 2 miles an hour discrepancy between the first and the second half. And then finally, UKV, which actually has it the other way around, which has a little bit of a puff of breeze coming through in the morning and then it calming down in the afternoon. So overall, I'm not expecting weather to be a massive factor for Sunday. The much bigger factor is this leaderboard and the placement points that come into play. So before we even go through ownership, shots gained metrics a little bit later, let's take a look at the makeup of the top 5, top 10, because, depending on the exact makeup, the exact kind of shot differential between players, it changes our strategy on a day like this. And of course, Scotty Scheffler dealing with that 4-stroke lead. I wasn't quite sure it was going to be 4 strokes at this point. If you heard my hot take yesterday, I thought he would win by a touchdown. Well, he's on pace to do so at this point. So tip of the cap to Scotty Scheffler too. It looks like he's going to get major number 4 this week, and the ownership's going to reflect that. I've got him over 50% projected owned in my projections. We're going to go through the top 15 highest owned players on the slate here in just a minute or so, but you've got Scotty up top, seemingly has locked up with the win at this point. You have Hao Tong Lee in second place that is also going to be extremely high owned, but he's due to get some decent placement points as well, as long as he has like a -1, -2 rounds. And then also you have players like Fitzpatrick in third, and then a logjam of legit just guys that are even in form heading into this week as well. So, of course, a Rory, a Hatton kind of spearhead that. Chris Gotterup, the champion from the week before. But Harris English has been in incredible form the last 2 months, so no surprise that he's at the top either. But you have Xander Schauffele, last year's Open champion, towards the top. Robert McIntyre, Henley, both the Højgaard twins at T9. And by the way, I wonder if the Højgaard twins are paired up or not. I have a feeling, because I haven't seen a tweet about it yet, that they're probably one group apart of each other. But either way, just so many usable options in the top 10 that even though Scotty is probably going to have this thing locked up, there's a world tomorrow where Scotty Scheffler wins this thing and that he's not the optimal play up top. Part of that comes down to the price tag at $13,300, but it also depends on guys like Rory, Hatton, and probably another stud on top of that, probably 2 or even 3 players from 9K plus. They're going to have to score 50 plus DraftKings points to make that a possibility, because Scotty Scheffler, for all intents and purposes, I've got him scoring like 50 plus points tomorrow almost every single time. So to upseat him and to make him somebody that's probably not going to be in the winning lineup, you not only have to have just one guy below him go off, but because this way that the lineup construction looks right now, and we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but I think it's important to lay the foundation of the slate ahead of time, is when you use Scotty Scheffler, it forces you off of all the other guys up top. So, for example, if we go over to the pricing tab, you can't play a Rory with Scotty Scheffler. It's just literally not going to work unless you play all 6K guys. And even then, I don't even think you can make it work. If you want to use Scheffler, then like a Hatton, a Xander Schauffele, a Fitzpatrick getting placement point potential, or even like if you're down here the 9K range with an O'Bear, your McIntyres, your Henleys of the world are a little bit more realistic at $8,400. But these high 9K guys, if you start with Scotty, it almost completely takes you off of them. So in my opinion, this slate comes down to whether you're going to use Scotty Scheffler or not. If you're going to, it's going to be a lot of value plays that you're pairing up with him. Potentially, your Russell Henleys at $8,400. And in my opinion, it makes your lineup construction extremely predictable. And there is an opportunity, or at least a chance, that Scotty Scheffler doesn't get there. So what I'm doing personally is I'm playing 50% Scotty Scheffler lineups, and then I'm going to have 50% of my builds that are using some of the other guys that are in contention in hopes that they can go nuclear low. Because if we go to the scoring average, it was by far the lowest of the week today. So it went from way over par round 1 +2 to 0.4 over par, and then now -1. The wind conditions are, I would say, even calmer than today, at least on most of these models. And especially in the afternoon, like on this UKV, this would be a scoring bonanza for your leaders. And then you add on top of it that Aaron Fleener, who's the caddy for JT Poston, said that the pin locations look the easiest that they've had the entire week. We could see a scoring average of even better than -1, which for Sunday at a major is unheard of. That never happens. But because of the way that Scotty's up by 4 strokes, maybe the RNA said, you know what? We don't want this to be an absolute just runaway train. We want somebody from that pack to go out there and catch them. So I think there's upside for Scotty Scheffler not to make the optimal lineup, even though I think that his certainty to win this golf tournament is probably like 99%. Like I'm that confident that he's going to win this 4th major. But even then, in my 150 max portfolio, I'm going to have 75 lineups with him and then 75 that are running without him. So I just want to set the tone there, because I know Scotty Scheffler is going to be a big talking point for a lot of people. But that's my take on it. And you don't have to go 50-50 like I am. I'm just sharing that insight, giving you guys some perspective into what I'm doing with my 150 max portfolio. It's a little bit different when I have 150 lineups and I'm playing in the big $5. I can spread out my exposure a lot more than most people. I would say that if you're not a 150 maxer, that you probably want to commit in one direction or the other. If you're in a 2 to 3 max, especially, commit to one way or the other. But even in a 20 max, when you don't have a full portfolio's worth of lineups to work with, it's a better decision, I'd say, more often than not, to either take probably 100% Scotty and get some leverage on that spot, or to take 0% and play that ownership fade and hope that, again, 2-3 of those guys that are 9K plus can break that 50 fantasy point mark. So that's, in my opinion, whether to Scotty or whether not to Scotty. You guys can feel free to chime in the chat what you guys think about the Scotty Scheffler situation. But let's move on to the ownership angle. So we talked some weather as well. The next thing before we go through shots gained metrics and figuring out who we're going to play is knowing who the highest owned players in the slate are going to be. And we already kind of hinted at it a bit. We know Scotty is going to be the highest owned player, but these are per my projections on my Patreon page, which you can find a link to the Patreon on my X/Twitter. That is GSLukeDFS. in my bio. There's a link to it. But this will give us a good idea for exactly what the field's going to do. And it's a really weird slate with the ownership up top. And you guys aren't really going to get to appreciate this because it's really only the high-owned players that you see up here. But most times, and we do this a lot on the live streams, usually it's a lot of like 9, 10K guys that we have in the top 15 of the pricing. Well, you can see here, it's Scotty Scheffler at 13 grand, no crap, right? 55% owned. And that's on average. I think in single entries, he'll be 60 to 70% plus owned in most of those. But in GPPs, the larger field contest, I don't think he's going to be quite as highly owned as some people are going to take the same strategy that I am in half my lineups and play some of those 9, 10K guys instead. But after Scotty Scheffler, where's all the 10K guys? And you may notice that there's none of them that I have in ownership, even a Fitzpatrick, even a Rory, even a Xander that are starting just a few shots off of second place. There's no way for them to get the ownership. And I'm sure there's going to be websites out there that make their showdown projections and that completely butcher the ownership angle, that are allocating too much salary in their projections and have guys like that at like 20% ownership. And like maybe one of them gets there, like maybe a Rory, a Xander, like one of those guys gets close to 20%. The vast majority of them, though, are going to be closer to 10%, even under 10% ownership for the guys that are like -4, -5. So that's why I think that there's some upside to getting to those lineups. It's not just the fact that Scotty isn't always going to be in the optimal lineup if he wins, but it's also the fact that there's a game theory edge, unlike any that we've really ever seen towards the top end of the board on some of the other players. And I know we just talked about the guys that were really in contention towards the top, but guys like Jon Rahm that are -2, I mean, he's really not going to get you placement points. Sub 5% owned, sub 3% owned in some GPPs. Let me go to the pricing tab on the other page here so I can get an idea of some of the other scrubs that haven't played as well. I shouldn't call them scrubs because they're elite tier players in this field. But Hovland, right, +2, playing like a slapdick this week. You're talking sub 3% ownership on a Hovland for tomorrow. A Shane Lowry, who complaining about his stomach bug, sub 1.5% ownership. A Sepp Straka at even par. I mean, not the best round 3 by any means. A little bit of a short game regression candidate maybe when we get to the stats here in a minute, but sub 3% ownership in large field GPPs. So the Scotty Scheffler thing and being 4 strokes ahead is not only an interesting one from the ownership bank, from the strategy angle, getting ahead of myself there, but also one from the ownership angle as well. So you'll see that the next highest owned player is a Haotong Li at about 27%. Chris Goddard in the 7, nearly 8K range is about 24% too. And the next hot spot of ownership, so you've got Scotty, and then the next landing spot for most of the field after Scotty Scheffler is a lot of the top end of the 8K range, or top end of the 7K range, or maybe bottom end of that 8K range. So you can see like a Henley, for example, he's $8,400. He's getting some steam rather than those 9, 10K players because you physically can't fit in a Scotty Scheffler. So, and that's why having, a subscription to a site like mine on my Patreon page, also the SHIPIT Nation website that is very good at putting together ownership projections as well, is so important, because I know that a couple sites out there that are going to make mistakes with this ownership are going to have their subscribers thinking that those guys in the 9, 10K range are going to be 20% owned, and that they're just going to like lock Scotty and not see that game theory angle as well. And when they look at the ownership in their GPPs tomorrow, they're going to be really surprised by what they see. So don't be surprised by that. Have an idea of where the field is going to be coming in, which in my opinion is a lot of ownership towards the middle end of the board. So a few other things to note on here. And guys like Harry Hall, Justin Rose, they're in that mid-tier range and they're close to 20%. But then you also have some cheaper guys that are popping off. Like, for example, a 7K Keegan Bradley, a $7,300 Rasmus Højgaard, or even like a Bazane Hoot, who I've got at about 15% ownership. Not a lot of 6K guys that you see here. And like I said, it's really that middle end of the board because of Scotty that is getting hammered. And it's because of the average salary that you have remaining after using him, just leaves you on a lot of these sort of options. So if you want to get different, at least from the lineup construction angle, it's really obvious. And it's the kind of lineup that I mentioned if you're getting off Scotty. It's the 9, 10K guys. And then even if you're using, let's say, Scotty and then some middle end of the board guys too, maybe you use a 6K guy, right? And the 6K range, for the most part, outside of like a couple players, is sub 2% ownership on like 75% of the 6K range. So that's how you can get different to the field. For the entire sheet, check out my Patreon page, which once again can be found on my X/Twitter at GSLukeDFS. Let's talk through some the game. Sorry, got ahead of himself there. let's talk through the shots gained metrics now. So we're going to try and figure out what to look for in our plays and exactly what you can do to round out that process. So we're going to go through some general stuff first before we go through any player pool deep dives. So any players in particular that you guys want me to break down, feel free to let me know. But that can be for placement points towards the top. It can be for some of your value plays, middle tier guys that you're getting a little bit different with. Anyone is live game for those questions. So first thing we're going to go through would be the shots gained ball striking, which I have Data Golf up here again. Bet the number is not loaded in quite yet. They, I think, have to do it manually, so that's why it's taken them a little bit longer. But these aren't exactly the same as what you have on the Open Championship site, but it is going to give us a really good idea of where these players are ranking out. And the thing we got to know about John Perry is that he made a hole-in-one today, so even with that, he was gaining strokes on approach, so we can't completely discount the 4 shots gained in that category, but that has a lot to do with why he's number 1 in the field in both ball striking and shots gained approach. But players like a Matt Wallace, Dustin Johnson did it a little bit more sustainably. Terrell Hatton also had a hole-out eagle, so though he's into the positive on approach, it's worth noting that he gained well over a stroke and a half to the field on that one shot alone. But as Xander Schauffele, consistent ball striking across the board. Ludwig Gobert, Wyndham Clark, Sepp Straka did it that same way. And just like I said for round 2 and 3 showdown, your top 5 in shots gained ball striking usually get a pretty good bump with the ownership, but not so much when we get a little bit further down the board. So for example, like a Sepp Straka at T51, I already told you before, looking at sub 3% ownership there. So like there are some real diamonds in the rough that you could get to on your process to help you offset some of that Scotty Scheffler chalk. And to continue down the board here, Scotty had a good ball striking day. Chris Goddard up as well. But Lucas Glover, Corey Connors, a little bit lower owned than some of their counterparts, are about average ownership at most on one of those 2 players. But Henrik Stenson, solid ball striking day too. Short game kind of let him down a bit. He lost about 0.6 strokes between those 2 categories, but potentially a low-owned value play that you could use for some differentiation. Haotong Li at number 2, solid ball striking all week. In fact, if you take a look at his shots gained approach, he's number 1 out of everyone in the field. So, you know, for conviction plays, I like to see guys that are hitting the irons well, and he would check that box. Mav McNeely, Hideki Matsuyama, Bryson, Harry Hall, all also well over a stroke gained ball striking. And I also like to look at some of the short game stats as well. So ball striking, the most consistent part of golf from round to round. That's why we really rely on it more than most categories. By the way, ball striking is off the tee plus approach. So it's just adding those 2 together. On the other half of it, the short game stats, so putting in around the green, a lot more volatile than what you have with how you're hitting it. So for example, Russell Henley, who I bet for a head-to-head. I was glad that he shot -6, won me that. However, him gaining 3.5 strokes putting is not sustainable in the least. 4 strokes gained between those 2 categories is something that he'll do like once a month on the PGA Tour. So Lee Westwood gaining 3 strokes putting, that doesn't seem like something he can back up. A Jacob Skov-Olesen, he's done it in 2 out of his 3 rounds at this point. So he's making it a little bit more of a regular thing than we expect, but you know, that kind of putting performance is not something that we can really rely on. Harris English gaining about 4 strokes in the short game categories, a little bit of a red flag there as well. And it's not like these guys become automatic fades, because if the ball striking stats were decent enough, like I'll still get to them in my lineups, but it's not a good thing to see a whole bunch of dark green with the putting or around the green. So for example, the around the green poppers like Sanjay, Rose, Connors, Leonard, also a Keegan Bradley and Mark Leishman over a stroke and a half gained in that category. Guys that it's a little bit of a red flag for, but if like I said, the rest of the stats are good enough, I can still use them at relatively low ownership. Now, on the other side of that, though, if you take a look at the guys that lost a whole bunch in these short game categories, and then they could be a little bit of a bounce back spot. So Matty Schmidt, I don't know if I can get there. He's in dead last. I don't know what the hell happened to him today. That +8 is just almost unexplainable with how easy the scoring conditions were. But maybe a more realistic option, because we still want to make sure that we're taking guys that were half decent. It was more so just like one of the 2 categories on the short game that held him back. So, for example, Jordan Spieth, like he's my guy. I know he didn't have the best day today, but like it was about a neutral with the ball striking stats, including tee to green. Let's add in the around the green. He's about a neutral in those 3. And then he lost 2 strokes putting. Like that's not the worst stat profile that I've ever seen in human history. This one for Keegan Bradley too. He gained about 1.8 strokes with his tee to green play and then lost 2 strokes putting. Like that's a potential bounce back spot. Same thing with an Aaron Rye, same kind of stat profile, Matt Fitzpatrick as well. So that's another way that I get to play. Sometimes it's the ball striking. That's one of the 4 ways that I get to plays for any given showdown slate. Short game regression is another one. It's not even just the putting, but we can look around the green as well. The around the green losses, though, normally aren't as easy to find, because if you're losing around the green, it means you're missing a bunch of greens most of the time. And if that's the case, your approach play is usually not going to be there. But you can see that there's a few exceptions to the rule. Like Soderberg did gain on approach, and then he gave away like 4 strokes in the short game categories. I'm not getting there for my exposure, but like in theory, he could be due for some short game regression. Phil Mickelson, he lost 4 strokes short game too, right? Could be due for a little bit of regression, but he lost 2 strokes ball striking too. So like, I'm not getting to a Phil Mickelson or anything, but a Brian Harman would be an example of a player that I'm getting to. He lost about 4 strokes in the short game categories, but he gained almost a stroke with his ball striking. So a Brian Harman, I think a decent bounce back spot of himself. So you want to be pretty picky about your short game regression candidates, but that's another way that I get to players. And on top of just looking at the stats from today, I'll also look for course history players, which we have from 2019 at the Open Championship. Also any links course history, that's another way that I'll get to players in my pool. Also high upside players, those are guys that make a whole lot of birdies. You can use birdie or better percentage on the PGA Tour or Live Golf websites to try and find players that are more aggressive. And even though placement points are a thing, right, we got to take guys starting in that top 5, top 10. It's not the end all be all, and you still have that raw scoring aspect, especially at a course that's playing easier over the weekend, right? Potentially -1 or maybe even lower for Sunday, depending on that weather. So don't be shy to try and take guys that can fill it up with the putter, that have that high birdie or better percentage, because that is still a factor from this showdown format. And those are the 4 things that I typically use to get to my player pool. That includes rounds 2 and 3. Round 4, though, I add some placement points on top of that. So, for example, like a Scotty Scheffler is down as a placement point guy, but there are also some conviction plays towards the top that I'll be getting to that I'm using because of where they're starting. So, for example, a lot of those players, I'll use the full event stats to break them down. So, for example, I usually go to the ball striking for that as well. And Haotong Li, #1 shots gained to ball striking. So that's why I said before, like at second place, like he could be a conviction play with how well he's been hitting it. A Brian Harman at T9. I know he didn't have his best stuff today, but it was really the short game that held him back. He's still #2 in shots gained ball striking. A Terrell Hatton, a Scotty Scheffler, Westwood, Goddard, Matt Fitzpatrick. Of those first 7 players that I've pointed out there, I'm playing 6 of the 7 of them. There's only 1 of them that I don't have in my player pool. And it's partially because the ownership on a couple of them I think is lower than it should be, especially like the 9K guys, like a Hatton, a Fitzpatrick, Goddard. I'm using those guys. Obviously using Scotty Scheffler, as I've already outlined, Haotong Li as well. It's because they're doing it in a sustainable fashion. They're gaining off the tee. They're gaining on approach. They're not luck sacking themselves around the golf course. And I know Matt Fitzpatrick has chipped in a couple times, but chipping in a couple times doesn't get you to -9, right? That maybe takes you from like -7 to -9. The baseline for Matt Fitzpatrick this week has still been some really solid golf. So that's how you can use the shots gained metrics to your advantage. But the things like course history, also looking at high upside players, round 4 historical, something that a lot of people on the SHIPIT Nation Stone use. It's a great tool to take a look at guys that play well on a specific round. You can take a look at fescue putting, a lot of different things you can add into your modeling and your process to get to your players. Just have a process and have intentional reasons for why you're getting to everyone that you're using. So for example, like on that, Patreon sheet that you saw before, anyone that I have down in my player pool, the reasoning is given with it as well. So that, obviously I can convey the thought process to my subscribers, but also to show that there's not somebody that's just in my player pool for no damn reason at all. So let's get to the questions now. Hit me up with any of those specific player pool deep dives that you got, and then we're going to go through some strategy and wrap it up after. But to make sure I don't miss any, let's go back to the top of chat. So Laura Cantor fan is asking about an early only slate. So I'm not sure if they're offering that, but I know at times they do. I would say for a major championship, there's probably a better chance of them doing it, but you'll have to check out the lobby and see what they're offering. Yeah, Scotty's -700. That's some pretty crazy stuff. You said, hell of a first week in the Patreon for you. Hey, that's great to hear, Phoenix. I believe I saw you were the one on Twitter, right, that tweeted at me with that near takedown. Yeah, you finished just ahead of me in that $5 drive the green. I saw your name up there. A few of the guys that you finished around also, I was keeping an eye on as well. So good stuff. And let's run it back for Sunday. He said, time to redeem yourself. Cheers, round 4. That's what it's for, man. Best of luck with all of our exposure. What's going on, Steven? Said, can I play a Rahm or Bryson for upside with the form not pointing that way? You can, especially because they're like 2 to 3% owned. I will say that I'm personally not the biggest fan of getting to either of those two, but high upside, low owned players in general are in play. I personally am trying to look for guys that were like short game regression candidates that were showing me something ball striking from round 3. But if you want to throw the stats aside too, I think that's a viable strategy, because really what we're trying to accomplish by getting to those plays is the ownership angle. I mean, you could try and, give yourself a rhyme and reason for getting to a specific play, but that game theory edge is 99% of why you're making that kind of pivot. So it's viable. I will say though, if you're going to do that, that means you're not playing Scotty Scheffler. So that's kind of tough. And so you're going to want to throw in like a Hatton, probably a Rory maybe into that lineup, maybe a Xander Schauffele, because you're going to need some placement points too. You said one Hogard with Henley and then one with Bobby Mack. Okay, so they're split up. That's kind of unfortunate. I was hoping they'd be together. That'd be a heck of a storyline for Sunday. Let's see. Great day. Congrats. Yeah, I appreciate that, Ernie. It was a solid day overall, even for props and betting too, so we'll take it. You say RNA needs someone to shoot that 63 for a chaser. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking too, man, at least based on what Aaron Fleener was saying about the setup. I didn't have time to go through every single pin quite yet, but I'll trust the PJ Tour caddy. I mean, he's JT Poston's caddy, for goodness sakes. Probably knows a lot more than I do. You got Kevin saying, which out of contention guy nukes on Sunday traditionally? You're looking at like JT Finau or Hav. Well, the answer to that Sunday Hav. We call him Sunday Hovland for a reason, but JT too. I mean, he randomly pops off. I'll throw out a few other names. Jordan Spieth tends to do it randomly too. Just on Sunday, means nothing. He'll shoot -8. He's done it 3 or 4 times this year already. So yeah, I'm playing Jordan Spieth. He's one of those high upside random nuke rounds that I'm hoping for. It's tough to get those players correct, but when you do, it means a whole lot more for your actual results than getting like a Scotty Scheffler, right? Like, playing Scotty Scheffler is not really going to do anything for your lineups tomorrow. It's going to be the guys like one of those out of contention players that win and loses you the GPP. So I think if you're going to spend time on your player pool, try and find good plays, it's that portion of the board that you want to add some extra time to, because that's really where going to generate most of your EV. He said Lowry for sure going to shoot the 63 after shitting down his pants. Yeah. RIP to him. I think he probably wore the dark pants today, just in case that happened. Let's look at what happened to Finau today. That's a good call, Nick. Let's look at that. So round 3, he lost 3.5 strokes off the tee. That's it. The rest of the game was solid. I mean, even the neutral putter is just fine for Tony. He's not usually a really good putter, but the 3.5 strokes lost off the tee is just a major no-go. Now, it was mostly blowups, big holes where he was losing almost a stroke off the tee. So like 9 hit it into the natural area in short. 11 did the same exact thing. You'd have to think that that's probably not going to happen in back-to-back days. But his last, let's look at his last 10 holes. -0.88 off the tee. Neutral, -0.82. -0.65. Neutral, -0.4. What the hell did he have going on in that back 9? And luckily, they ended a lot earlier today, so they had daylight to get out there on the range. Hopefully, he can figure it out heading into tomorrow, because I'm using him with that course history. Let's look at Henrik. Henrik hit the ball well today, so he was one of those ball striking poppers before, and Henrik has played well at links-style golf courses. In fact, he's got one of the best links course histories of anyone in the entire field. So yeah, give me some Henrik Stenson, man. He gained on approach, he gained off the tee today, and then lost in the short game categories. Also going to be super low owned. So if you're using him down low, is going to get you different to the field in the process. My thoughts yesterday on Harman were spot on. Mahalo. Yeah, felt like he was due to come back down to earth, but I like him for the bounce back now. So we'll see if we can get him right 2 days in a row, right? The stinker and then the good day after it. That would be kind of nice. Harman and English, you think English felt a little bit pressure? Yeah, I could see Harman coming around. English, I don't think English played that terribly, but he could have played better, man. Yeah, he wasn't making a lot of putts, so I could see it. I could get behind those two as well. You said, to be fair, the short game has been holding Harman back his whole life. Oh, that's brutal, my man. Hey, it's deserved. He's gets that his whole life, I'm sure, too. Rory might be a fade. He's putting too good, but he's a great player and could putt good again tomorrow. Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, he putted really well in 2019 in those 2 rounds. Missed the cut because of the snowman that he made on the first hole. I would say that he's probably not going to gain 2 strokes putting every single round. So just to show you guys the stat profile, I mean, he still gained tee to green. So it wasn't like it was all putting today. He's probably not going to gain 2 strokes, though, on the greens every single round. But the rest of this, if he can take that from, what is it, about 1 point, almost 2 strokes tee to green, if he can take that to 3.5 strokes, then it might not matter if he gains like 2 strokes to the field putting. So I still think he sets up decently, but I don't think that a nuke round in back-to-back days might be asking a little bit much. So got to play yellow decky. Yeah, and I don't know if you saw Nick, but he's down with the high upside tab out in my player pool, which is coincidentally the yellow tab that I have. So yeah, yellow decky, high upside, yellow tag on Sunday. Sign me up for sure. And yeah, it looks like Michael's in on that as well. He said, come on, can we get the thumbs up numbers up? Yeah, if you guys haven't smashed the like button already, what are you guys waiting for? Let's get to it. We got thoughts on Matt Wallace. Really good ball striking stats. And it's not even just for today, but Matt Wallace has been striping it all week. Today, about 3.5 strokes ball striking. For the entire week, about 2 strokes into the positive. So yeah, I think he sets up like a 7 out of 10 stat wise. It's very favorable, and he's T14, so he's got some ownership going, but not as much as you'd think, because there's enough guys around him that are playing well that the ownership's more spread out than it otherwise would be. So we're going back to Finau for sure. Yeah, I just hope that he's not injured. I mean, when you see somebody losing strokes off the tee in 10 straight holes, that's the first thing that came to my mind, right? And I'm saying, like, what the heck happened to him? Is maybe his back got blown out or something? Pause. Don't take that the wrong way, Tony. I didn't mean it that way, but maybe he hurt his back at some point. But yeah, we'll see. I'm going back to him just in case he pops off. He said, Phil Mickelson's going to get 5 birdies. Okay. You heard it there first from Rico. And he said, when DC deep dive, can you have a 3rd good day in a row? Ooh, I don't know if 3 good days in a row is likely for Wyndham Clark, but stat-wise, it was a lot better today than round 2. Today, it was a very balanced profile. Like, he gained putting, he also gained on approach, and was neutral to above neutral in the other 2 categories. Sorry, this is for the event. Sorry, let's go to the round 3 stats, but it is the same exact way. That's why I was confused, because I looked at his stat profile earlier, and you can see for today, it's literally the exact same, right? He gained putting and on approach, and then the other 2 categories, he's about neutral or positive. Round 2, though, it was all the putter that got Wyndham Clark there. So this kind of concerned me. I still played him, though, for round 3. So this is a learning lesson, I would say, for the live stream in general, because the shots gained profiles, we do the deep dives together. I do give my takes on the stats, but it's not my entire process. That's why we got the high upside players. That's why I got the course history. That's why we have placement points in play for Sunday, because Wyndham Clark, for example, I use because of his high upside nature. He's the kind of guy that just sometimes gains 4 or 5 strokes putting. So that 3 strokes putting, for some players, it's a bigger red flag than others. It's not as big of a red flag for a player like Wyndham Clark that does that on the regular. So today, he went out there and was able to back that up. The issue for me now is, and this is why I'm not as high on him for tomorrow, is that he was relatively low owned. So before today at even par, it's not like he was getting that much steam. But now that he's T14 and he's at that -5 mark, he's going to be significantly higher owned. So it's not like it's as much of a shot in the dark. That's kind of what it was with me playing him in round number 3. It's like, you know what? He's volatile as hell. I want that in my large field GPP lineups. I need guys that can get close to the nuts. Not so much in round 4, right? Round 4, you got to commit to him a little bit more because of that ownership, which in my opinion makes him a slightly worse play. Doesn't make him a terrible play, but it makes him, in my opinion, a little bit worse than what he was for today's round. Tony's known for blowing backs out. I don't know why I read that, but guess so, man. Geez, easy on Tony. Yeah, I didn't mean to say that, guys, but yeah, I can see how that sounded funny as hell. I caught myself when I said it. So you said you're going to... You guys in chat are hilarious. Let's go on to the strategy stuff. So let's go on to the contests that are available, which are a little bit bigger than round number 3. However, they're super top heavy still. In fact, the drive the green, that was great. It was a 7th to first place. For today's round is now 25% to first. So they took it from solid to dog shit with the payout structure. So I went 50 max this today. I'm probably not doing it for tomorrow. I'm just not going to do it with that kind of payout structure. I'll get some exposure to it, and I'll probably play it even more aggressively than I otherwise would have. But mostly it's going to be a lot of single entries free for most of my exposure. And I might go to like 100 entries in that. We'll have to see. It's last round of a major. So I might just degen it, right? And just maybe I'll even max enter it, for goodness sakes. But most of my like high dollar exposure is going to be in this sort of contest where it's a single entry. It's a 7th to first place, which for single entries is decent. Really, we're looking for 10% to first. So a 10th to first in most of these, but a 7th to first is a lot better than like a 5th or even a 6th to first place. And if we scroll down, we can find contests like the Albatross. That one's a 10%er to first. So that's one of the kind of payout structures that we're looking for. The dog leg here is a little bit over 10% to first, but that's still a lot better than most of the single entries that you're going to see. And you still have some like 2 to 3 maxes. You've got like the 4 entry $250 that you can look at as well. This one's a little top heavy, but it is only a 6 to first place. So maybe rather than max entering like the $5 150 max, there's a chance that I just throw 4 lineups into this thing because the payout structure's a little bit flatter. There's only 266 people that I'm playing against. And rather than throwing like 50 or 100 entries into the GPP and not having 150 against some of the other sharks, now I can max enter it and have an even playing field against all of my competitors. So the contests that are available, a lot of that's going to come down to the bankroll that you're walking in with. But really, you want to maximize, at least in my opinion, for your long-term results, the flatness of the contest. You want to get to the lower rake contests too. That's another part of it. You don't want to be entering in the big rake contests if you can. Flat payout structure, low rake contests will make you a better player long-term. And that's even without changing your strategy, right? The more experience you have, the more you can refine your process. That's going to help as well. But on top of that, add again little things like this, right? Entering the right type of contest, the ones without as much rake, will give you extra 1 to 2% edges, which over a season can add up to a very large number. So don't sleep on that aspect. And then we're talking through lineup construction. This is where it comes down to whether to Scotty or not. Because if you use Scotty Scheffler towards the top end of the board, it puts you at $7,300 remaining. So, let's say you went, I want to play Scotty and Rory together. Well, you really can't make that work easily. If you did that, you're down to $6,500, which means you can't play anyone in the 8K, 9K range. And realistically, if you're going to use a Scotty Scheffler, you're probably at the most getting to a guy like a Ludwig Aubert. And more realistically, you're probably dropping down to like a Russell Henley as your second man in. This kind of lineup is doable. I'm still going to have plenty that look like this, but it does pigeonhole you into the middle end of the pricing. And that's why a lot of these 7K players are getting by far the most ownership with the placement aspect. So let's throw in a Haotong there. We've got to get some placement points. So we've got 3 players now that I say would qualify for that. You might want to throw in a 4th player just to try and get even more placement points in there. I don't think it's the most important on a slate like tomorrow just because, and I know it's Sunday of a major, but the scoring conditions really don't look that difficult. So you might want to lean into a little bit more game theory just because of that. But we're not going to go too overboard with that. So let's throw in I guess a Lucas Glover, who's a little bit lower owned than some of the other guys that are starting at T22 or better. And then for our last 2 players, this is where I'm really going to push it with the ownership component. Like Matthew Jordan, he'd be a low owned sub 2%er that you could use to offset ownership. And then at $6,500, you could probably use anyone there and get away with it. But if you went down to like $6,400 and you threw in somebody there that you had as a low owned sleeper play, like let's say Henrik Stenson, $6,300, leaving $200 on the table, taking another guy who's sub 3%. If you've got 2 sub 3%ers in there, and then you've got 1 like medium owned play, and that's what we have with Glover. Like Glover, I wouldn't classify as chalk. That's enough differentiation for the big $5 or $25 GPP. And I think a lot of people would probably be surprised to hear that and probably think that you have to have more leverage in some of those GPPs. And that's not the case on Sundays. And even in general, like regular main slate lineups, you don't have to go too overboard with getting differentiation. And especially for Sunday Showdown, where we have the placement points, where we know the top 5, top 10 already, you really don't have to get that different. You just really want to make sure you're not duplicating yourself with other lineups. That's why leaving some salary on the table, getting those 2 sub 3%ers are so important. But you want to have a core towards the top that you can build around, that you feel good about trying to finish in the top 5. And then you want those 2 flyers, those 2 runners towards the end that you're going to have moving up the board. Now, it doesn't have to be cheap guys that you're using to get that differentiation. It could also be a player up top. But with Scotty Scheffler, you can't really do that anymore, right? Like maybe your up top guy that you're getting different with could be like, rather than Russell Henley, you get to an 8K guy that's a little bit lower owned. But the other lineup construction is the one that is much, much easier to get different with. In fact, if you fade Scotty Scheffler, your lineup by default is almost automatically going to be different to the rest of the field. So for example, if you went Terrell Hatton, let's throw in a Matt Fitzpatrick. Let's also throw in a Robert McIntyre, $8,800. That puts us to a higher salary remaining for our last 3 players than the other lineup that we had. And then now, rather than just having 1 placement point guy towards the top that's an absolute stud, we have guys like Hatton, Fitzpatrick, McIntyre that you're going to feel pretty damn good about heading into the final round. So I really like this lineup construction. I like both lineup constructions. That's why I'm getting to both of them. But I think the upside of this one is so high that I'm going 50-50 on my exposure, even with the fact that I think Scotty is for sure winning this thing. So let's go down to the 7K range. You still have to find a way to get a little bit of differentiation. So we'll use Tony Finau as like our averagely owned play. Again, like a Lucas Glover, he's not going to be super highly owned compared to some of the other guys at the top. And then for our last two, we still need to force our hands with the ownership, make sure that we're not going to duplicate ourselves, all of that. We could go, Matthew Jordan again if we really wanted to, but we'll switch it up here just for the sake of, the live stream and keeping it fresh. I guess you could go like a Ricky Fowler with his links history. I like that quite a bit. He's played well at the Scottish Open as well. And then at $6,700, I would say if you avoid a Leishman Wallace, you'd be good in the large field GBPs, but you probably wouldn't want to take a Leishman or a Wallace there because they're going to be closer to 10% owned. We have, 3 guys towards the top that are 15% or higher in most cases. Even guys like Finau, Fowler, they're going to be like 5% or up with the ownership. So your last man in, you don't want to like another 10% on top of that. Like you might get away with it. What I mean by get away with it is you might not duplicate yourself with another person in the $5 or $25 GPP, but you would be kind of cutting it close if you went in that direction. But the bigger problem, and really why you should avoid it, is because of the lack of leverage. You're not going to have as many spots to really vault up those leaderboards. The guys like a Jordan Spieth, maybe a JT that go off at low ownership, those random poppers that we were mentioning before, those are the ones that really make or break your day. And I think a lot of people focus on the wrong stuff for Sunday Showdown. They think that the placement points up top are the hard part. A lot of pros, I even do this on some slates myself as well, will just play like all the chalk at the top end of the board. They'll kind of just match the field on it, move on, and then really focus on those lower owned plays that they get right to try and win and lose all of the money. I've seen that with guys like McLovin with their exposure. I've seen it with like a lot of the syndicate crew that all like the McLovins that I don't want to say they collude, but it kind of feels like they do to some extent. They all have similar type of lineups. I guess they learn from each other. Maybe they study each other, right? And try and enter the same sort of way. But that's how they handle a lot of their Sunday Showdown lineups. So don't sleep on that aspect. Truly focus on that leverage. That's where you're going to make and break your exposure. And let's have ourselves a Sunday slate. So that's all I've got, guys. Best of luck with everything that you guys are getting with. We've got Sunday of a major up. So I'm super excited for everything that's to come. Also, check out my prop and betting live stream. That'll be a little bit later on this evening at 7 p.m. Eastern time on my YouTube channel. That is GSLukeDFS. You can find that on YouTube if you type it in the search bar. And over there, we'll be going through all of the pin locations, stat averages from round number 3, also weather for round 4, and exactly how the golf course is going to play. So I'll give you an idea of scoring averages for birdies, bogeys, greens, fairways, all of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to go through the underdog and prize fix boards, also matchups on the sports books to give you guys an idea of all the different betting exposure for Sunday. So check that out if you guys are entering any bets on any of those sports books. But that's all I've got, guys. I hope to see a lot of your names towards the top end of those GPPs. And yeah, let's have ourselves a Sunday, everyone.